The merciless Montana winter of 1878 showed no mercy to anyone, least of all to Catherine Blackwell. Trapped in her remote cabin as a sudden blizzard descended from the mountains, her world, already confined to darkness since the fever took. Her site 3 years prior had become a prison of howling winds and deadly cold. With her supplies dwindling and the woodpile nearly exhausted, she resigned herself to the inevitable. But fate had other designs. As the blizzard's fury threatened to become her funeral dirge, the sound of heavy footfalls on her porch cut through. The wind's wail. The door opened, bringing with it a gust of frigid air and something else, the presence of another human being, accompanied by the soft padding of what could only be wolves. This is the forgotten tale of how Catherine Blackwell, blind widow of the frontier, found salvation in the most unlikely alliance when all hope seemed lost. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches. You make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Catherine clutched her late husband's hunting knife, the worn wooden handle familiar against her palm, as she faced the direction of the door. The fire in her hearth had died to embers hours ago, unable to compete with the relentless cold seeping through every crack in her modest cabin's walls. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady despite her fear. "I'm armed." No verbal response came, but she heard the unmistakable sound of the door closing, shutting out the worst of the winds.
Howl.
Heavy footsteps moved across her floor. A man, judging by the weight and stride. Then came other sounds, the soft click of animal claws on wood, the shake of what might have been snow from fur, a low whine that confirmed her suspicion. Wolves, or more likely, wolf dogs. Catherine tightened her grip on the knife. "Speak, or get out!" The footsteps approached, then stopped. A rustle of fabric, the creak of someone kneeling. Then the fire suddenly crackled back to life. She could feel its renewed warmth, hear the welcome pop of kindling. "You're freezing," a voice finally said, so rough and unused it seemed to crack upon delivery, like ice breaking on a spring river. Wood's almost gone. "I'm aware," Catherine replied, not lowering her knife. "The storm came faster than I expected." 12. Months earlier, Robert had brought her to this remote corner of Montana territory with promises of a fresh start after the fever that took her sight. Now he lay in a snow-covered grave behind their cabin, and Catherine was alone, learning to navigate a world of perpetual darkness in the harshest environment imaginable. She heard the stranger moving around her cabin, opening the door briefly, letting in another blast of cold air before closing it again. Something heavy thudded to the floor, followed by the distinct sound of wood being stacked. "You brought firewood?" she asked, puzzled. "Saw smoke dying," the man replied, his words economical to the point of being cryptic. "Bad night to lose fire." The autumn of 1878 had started promisingly enough. Despite her blindness, Catherine had established a small business selling remedies and tinctures made from plants she could identify by scent and texture. Robert's skills as a trapper had kept them well supplied with meat and pelts to trade at. The settlement 20 miles east, they'd finally begun to believe they might thrive in this wilderness, that Catherine's blindness wouldn't define their future. But 2 weeks ago, Robert had gone to check his distant trap lines before the first major snow. He hadn't returned. After 5 days of waiting, Catherine had been forced to accept that something terrible had happened. With no neighbors for miles and a blizzard brewing, she had prepared as best she could for a solitary winter, knowing her chances of survival were slim, and now this stranger and his animals had appeared from nowhere. "Why are you here?" she demanded, still maintaining her defensive posture. "This cabin is 3 days' ride from the nearest settlement." "Following Ridge Trail," the man answered, feeding the fire, judging by its growing warmth. "Storm came quick. Saw your chimney. His laconic speech pattern struck Catherine as odd, but no more unusual than his presence in such remote country during dangerous weather. "You have wolves with you," she stated rather than asked, hearing one of the animals shake, itself nearby. "Wolf dogs," he corrected. "3, they won't harm you." As if understanding their mention, one of the animals approached Catherine cautiously. She felt hot breath on her hand, then the soft press of a muzzle. Instinctively, she loosened her grip on the knife and reached out. Her fingers met thick, coarse fur, a solid, warm body that didn't flinch from her touch. "That's Shadow," the man said, something softening in his rough voice. "She knows that you can't see." Catherine withdrew her hand sharply. "How do you know I'm blind?" A pause. "Your eyes, the way you don't look towards sounds, the markings on your furniture and walls, strings and guides." He was observant then. Catherine had developed an elaborate system of notched surfaces and guide strings throughout the cabin to help her navigate and locate essential items. "What's your name?" she asked, finally lowering the knife to her lap. Another lengthy pause, as if the question required deep consideration. "Eli," he finally said. "Eli Walker." "Catherine Blackwell," she offered in return. "My husband, Robert, is—" She faltered, still unable to speak the truth aloud, as if saying it would make it more real. "I know," Eli said quietly. "Found him. 3 miles west, ravine. Buried him proper before the ground froze." The blunt revelation struck Catherine like a physical blow. She had suspected, of course, but hearing confirmation that Robert was truly gone and that this stranger had found and buried him left her momentarily speechless. Grief and gratitude warred within her. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice barely audible. Eli didn't respond verbally, but she heard him move toward the door again. Before she could ask what he was doing, it opened and closed quickly. Left alone with the wolf dogs, Catherine remained still, listening to their quiet movements around her cabin. One settled near the fire with a contented sigh, while another seemed to be investigating the corners of the room. Minutes later, the door opened again. More thuds and scrapes followed. Additional firewood being brought in, she realized, enough to last several days by the sound of it. "Storm's worsening," Eli announced. "Snow's deep already. No traveling until it passes. You're welcome to shelter." "Here," Catherine said, practical despite her reservations. "An extra pair of hands, especially ones connected to someone who could see, would significantly improve her chances of surviving the blizzard." "Need food," Eli stated. "Have meat." Catherine nodded toward her small pantry. "I have beans, flour, some preserves, not much else." She heard him moving efficiently around her cabin, the sounds indicating he was assessing her supplies. The third wolf dog had approached her now, this one larger than Shadow based on the heavier footfalls and higher height of the inquisitive nose that sniffed at her sleeve. "That's Timber," Eli explained, noticing her startled reaction. "Leader, protective." "And the third?" Catherine asked, cautiously extending her hand for Timber to inspect. "Ghost, youngest, best hunter." As if summoned by name, the third animal padded over, completing Catherine's introduction to the strange pack that had entered her life so unexpectedly. "You're not from around here," she observed as Eli continued his inventory of her supplies. His speech pattern, though oddly truncated, didn't carry the accent of a mountain man or frontier settler. A long silence followed before he answered. "East originally. Philadelphia. Long time ago." The admission surprised her. Whatever had brought this educated Easterner to the Montana wilderness and reduced his speech to these minimalist utterances must have been significant. "How long have you lived out here?" she asked. 7 winters, came the reply, followed by the clatter of her cooking pot being placed on the hook above the fire. "Alone, mostly. Better that way." Catherine understood isolation better than most. Even before her blindness, she had often felt separated from others by her interest in herbal medicine and natural remedies, pursuits that had earned her suspicious glances from townspeople who preferred the company of a proper doctor. "Yet here you are," she pointed out, "checking on a stranger's dying fire in the middle of a blizzard." Eli made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. "Wolves insisted. They sensed you. Wouldn't pass by." The idea that she owed her rescue to the instincts of wolf dogs rather than human charity struck Catherine as oddly fitting. Since losing her sight, she had found animals far more accepting of her condition than most people, who reacted with pity or discomfort. The smell of cooking. Food soon filled the cabin, some kind of stew combining her beans with whatever meat Eli had brought. Catherine's stomach growled in response. She hadn't eaten properly in days, too focused on conserving supplies and too overwhelmed by grief to maintain her strength. "You were planning to die," Eli stated bluntly as he stirred the pot. Not a question, but an observation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Catherine bristled at Eli's blunt assessment. "I was planning to survive," she corrected, though both knew it was only partially true. "Just running out of options." The sound carried neither judgment nor pity, merely acknowledgement. Something Catherine found unexpectedly refreshing. The meal was consumed mostly in silence, broken only by the occasional whine of one of the wolf dogs or the howl of wind rattling the cabin's shutters. Catherine savoured each bite of the hearty stew, warmth and sustenance, restoring some of her flagging strength. "How did you lose your sight?" Eli asked abruptly when they had finished eating. Most people approached the subject with awkward circumlocution, so his directness was startling. "Scarlet fever," she replied. 3 years ago. The doctor said I was lucky to survive at all." "Not luck," Eli observed. "Strength." Before she could respond to the unexpected compliment, he continued, "How long alone?" "Robert left 2 weeks ago to check trap lines before the first heavy snow." Catherine's throat tightened. "When did you find him?" 4 days ago, Eli answered, his voice gentler than before. "Appears he fell, leg broken badly, couldn't make it back." The image his words conjured was almost too painful to bear. Robert injured, struggling through snow, knowing what awaited if he couldn't return. Catherine pressed her fingers to her temples, as if the pressure might stem the tide of grief threatening to overwhelm her. "The blizzard," she managed after a moment. "How long will it last?" 3 days, maybe 4, Eli replied. "Worst I've seen in years." Catherine calculated the remaining supplies in her pantry. Even with what Eli had brought, food would be scarce by the 2nd day. As if reading her thoughts, he added, "Wolf dogs can hunt even in snow. They'll find something. In a blizzard? That seems improbable." "They're not ordinary dogs," Eli stated with such conviction that Catherine didn't argue. "Timber's grandfather was pure timber wolf. Ghost can smell prey through 3 feet of snow. Shadow senses things." He trailed off, apparently uncomfortable, elaborating. "What things does Shadow sense?" Catherine pressed, intrigued despite herself. A long pause followed. "Pain, fear, death coming, life too." He cleared his throat. "She knew about your eyes before I did." Catherine considered this as she listened to the animals settling around the cabin. One, Shadow, she presumed, had positioned herself at Catherine's feet, a warm, solid presence against her ankles. "How did you come to have wolf dogs?" she asked. Eli shifted, the floorboards creaking beneath him, found Timber's mother injured, pregnant, nursed her. She whelped 5 pups before dying, raised them. Only Timber survived first winter. "And the others? Shadow and Ghost?" "Timber found them. Different litters, abandoned or orphaned, brought them to my cabin. There was unmistakable affection in his voice when he spoke of the animals. They're family now, Catherine understood. After losing her sight, she'd discovered that family needn't be defined by blood. The settlement's herbalist, an elderly woman named Margaret, whom others avoided for her eccentric ways, had taken Catherine under her wing, teaching her to identify plants by scent, texture, and taste. When Robert had proposed the move to Montana Territory, Margaret had gifted Catherine with her entire collection of dried herbs and remedies, an inheritance of sorts from one healer to another. "You have medicines," Eli observed, interrupting her reminiscence. Catherine nodded toward the shelves where she kept her carefully labeled jars and pouches. "I'm something of an herbalist. People from the settlement sometimes travel here for remedies." "Useful skill," Eli commented, "especially out here." The conversation lapsed into silence again, but a more comfortable one. Catherine's initial fear had given way to cautious acceptance of her unexpected guests. The wolf dog's presence was oddly reassuring, their occasional movements and soft breathing adding life to a cabin that had grown too quiet since Robert's departure. Outside, the storm's intensity increased. Wind shrieked around the cabin's corners, and snow pattered against the window like tiny fists demanding entry. Catherine felt the temperature dropping despite the rekindled fire. "We should conserve wood," she suggested. "It needs to last." "Have more outside," Eli assured her, "stacked against north wall, enough for days." Another gift she hadn't anticipated. Catherine wondered at the strange turn of events that had brought this taciturn man and his wolf dogs to her door precisely when she'd given up hope. "Why were you on Ridge Trail?" she asked. "It's dangerous this time of year, even without a blizzard." The silence that followed her questions stretched so long that Catherine wondered if Eli had fallen asleep. Finally he answered, his voice so low she had to strain to hear it over the storm. "Heading north, away from people, farther into mountains." "Why?" Catherine pressed. "Too many settlers coming, cutting trees, building, bringing law." The distaste in his voice was evident. "Asking questions, wanting things named and counted." Catherine understood better than most the desire for solitude. After going blind, she'd endured countless well-meaning but suffocating interactions. People speaking too loudly as if her ears were affected, taking her arm without permission, making decisions. For her, as if her mind had failed along with her eyes. "Robert chose this location because it was remote," she admitted. "I was grateful. In town, people treated me like I was made of glass, or like my blindness was somehow contagious." "People fear what they don't understand," Eli observed. "Is that why you're running from them?" Catherine asked. "Because they don't understand you?" Another lengthy pause. Something like that. The evasive answer contained depths. Catherine sensed it would be unwise to probe. Whatever had driven Eli Walker from Philadelphia to the Montana wilderness 7 years ago, and now farther into its most inhospitable reaches, was clearly not a story he was eager to share. As the evening deepened into night, Catherine found herself growing drowsy, the combination of a full meal, warmth, and the emotional exhaustion of the day taking its toll. Eli seemed to notice. "You should sleep," he suggested. "I'll keep watch." Under normal circumstances, Catherine would never have considered sleeping with a stranger, especially a man, in her cabin. But these circumstances were far from normal, and something in Eli's demeanor inspired trust rather than fear. "There's a pallet behind the curtain," she offered. "We can take turns." "Don't need much sleep," Eli declined. "Wolf dogs and I will manage here." Catherine nodded, making her way carefully to her bed, guided by the familiar notches and strings she'd established. As she settled beneath the quilts, she heard Eli adding wood to the fire, and the wolf dogs rearranging themselves. 2 by the door and 1, shadow she suspected, positioning itself near her bed. Despite the howling storm and the presence of strangers, Catherine fell into the deepest sleep she'd had since Robert's disappearance. No nightmares plagued her, no anxiety jolted her awake, just peaceful darkness and the distant knowledge that she was, for the moment, safe. She woke to the smell of coffee, a luxury she'd been rationing carefully, and the sound of Eli moving. And quietly around the cabin, judging by the continued howl of wind, the blizzard had not abated during the night. "Morning," Eli greeted when he heard her stirring. "Storm's worse, but fire's good. Made coffee." Catherine sat up, disoriented momentarily by the unusual situation. "Thank you. I don't usually indulge in coffee unless special occasions." Eli finished when she faltered. Surviving seems special enough. The simple statement struck Catherine forcefully. Yes, she had survived, not just the blizzard, but the loss of her sight, the frontier's hardships, and now, it seemed, even Robert's death. Survival itself was indeed something to be acknowledged, perhaps even celebrated, with such small luxuries as morning coffee during a blizzard. "Yes," she agreed, accepting the warm mug he carefully placed in her hands. "I suppose it does." As day progressed into afternoon, the storm showed no signs of relenting. Catherine sat near the hearth, her fingers working methodically to rebraid several lengths of twine she used as guides throughout the cabin. Eli had gone out briefly, an excursion he'd described only as checking, and returned with snow melting in his beard and hair. "Winds shifted," he announced, stamping his feet to dislodge the snow. "Coming from northwest now, colder." The wolf dogs who had accompanied him shook themselves vigorously, spattering droplets across the wooden floor. Catherine heard Eli moving around the cabin, his footsteps deliberate as he checked windows and the lone door for drafts. "North shutter's loose," he observed. "Need to secure it." "There are tools in the box under the window," Catherine offered. While Eli worked on reinforcing the cabin against the elements, Catherine finished her task and turned her attention to taking inventory of her remaining medical supplies. Her fingers deftly identified each jar and pouch by the distinctive notches she'd carved into their containers. "You've adapted well," Eli commented, noticing her system. "Most wouldn't manage." Catherine's hands stilled. What choice did I have? Sit helplessly waiting for others to tend me? That's no life at all. "No," Eli agreed. "It's not." Something in his tone suggested personal knowledge of such limitations. Catherine wondered again about the mysteries surrounding her taciturn guest. "You mentioned Philadelphia," she ventured. "Were you a tradesman there? A merchant?" A lengthy silence followed. Catherine had begun to think he wouldn't answer when Eli finally spoke, his voice lower than before. "Doctor," he said simply. "Surgeon." The revelation startled her. "A doctor? How did you end up here, living with wolves in the wilderness?" The sound of tools being returned to the box punctuated another long pause. When Eli spoke again, each word seemed dragged reluctantly into the open. "War changed everything. Saw too much death. Caused too much death." His voice roughened. "Some couldn't be saved. Some I shouldn't have saved." The confession hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken complexities. Catherine waited, sensing there was more if she gave him space to continue. "After Antietam," he eventually resumed, "couldn't stand the smell of ether, the screams, the choices, who lives, who dies." A small, bitter laugh escaped him. "Came west, kept going, found peace in silence, in mountains." Catherine absorbed this revelation, understanding, blooming. His truncated speech pattern wasn't natural. It was chosen, a deliberate rejection of the articulate, educated discourse that must have filled his former life. Words themselves had become painful to him, reminders of a past he'd fled. "And the wolves?" she asked gently. "They don't judge," Eli said simply. "Don't need explanations. Accept what is." The wind howled particularly fiercely, as if underscoring his words. One of the wolf dogs, Ghost, judging by the lighter footfalls, padded across the room and settled near Catherine's feet with a contented sigh. "They've taken to you," Eli observed, something like surprise in his voice. "Animals often do," Catherine replied, reaching down to stroke Ghost's thick fur. "They see differently than humans, judge differently." "See differently," Eli repeated, thoughtfully. Yes, a comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the storm's constant assault and the occasional shifting of the wolf dogs. Catherine found herself surprisingly at ease in Eli's company, despite the strangeness of their situation. Perhaps it was because he, too, had chosen isolation, had rejected the conventional world with its expectations and judgments. "Your husband," Eli said abruptly, "he respected your independence, your skills." It wasn't a question, but Catherine nodded anyway. "Robert understood that my blindness didn't diminish my capabilities, just changed them. He never pitied me." "Rare," Eli commented. "Yes," Catherine agreed, remembering the many who had treated her as helpless after her illness. "Most people see blindness as the end of useful life. Robert saw it as merely a different path." She felt tears threatening and swallowed hard against them. Grief was still too raw, too close to the surface. "You have food stores for winter?" Eli asked, changing the subject with surprising sensitivity. "Some," Catherine acknowledged. "Not enough for the whole season. Robert was supposed to trade pelts for additional supplies before the passes closed." She sighed. "Without him, you planned to die," Eli finished bluntly, returning to his earlier observation. This time Catherine didn't deny it. "I considered my options and found them lacking. And now?" The question hung between them, deceptively simple, yet profoundly complex. What were her options now? The brutal truth was that a blind woman alone stood little chance of surviving a Montana winter. Even with the supplies Eli had brought, even with the firewood he'd stacked, the fundamental equation remained unchanged once he departed. Before she could formulate a response, Timber emitted a low growl near the door. The other two wolf dogs immediately tensed, rising to attention. "What is it?" Catherine asked, sensing the sudden shift in the cabin's atmosphere. Eli moved swiftly to the window, scraping frost from the glass to peer outside. "Something's moving in the storm." "A deer. Elk," Catherine suggested, aware that wildlife often sought shelter during blizzards. "No," Eli replied, his voice hardening. "Men. 3, maybe 4. Catherine's pulse quickened. "Who would be out in this weather?" "No one with good intentions," Eli stated grimly. He moved around the cabin with sudden purpose, gathering his rifle and checking its loading mechanism. Catherine rose, alarmed by the implications. "Trappers? Hunters?" "Raiders, more likely," Eli corrected. "Some follow storms. Target isolated homesteads when no one expects visitors." The wolf dogs' agitation increased, their growls deepening as they positioned themselves strategically around the cabin. Timber by the door, Ghost at the window, Shadow beside Catherine as if appointed her personal guardian. "What do they want?" Catherine asked, though she feared she already knew. "Whatever they can take," Eli answered bluntly. "Food, valuables, shelter." A significant pause. "Women, sometimes." A chill that had nothing to do with the blizzard ran through Catherine. She had heard whispered stories of frontier atrocities, of remote homesteads found empty or worse, when spring thaws allowed neighbors to check on one another. She had never imagined herself potential prey for such predators. "What do we do?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Eli's answer was immediate and resolute. "We leave." "Leave," Catherine echoed incredulously. "In a blizzard? That's suicide." "Staying is worse," Eli countered, his voice leaving no room for argument. 3 men, armed, bad odds, even with rifle. Catherine heard him moving efficiently. around the cabin, gathering items and stuffing them into what sounded like a canvas sack. "Wrap in furs," he instructed. "Anything you need for traveling, gather now. Quickly." Catherine stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. "I can't travel in a blizzard," she protested. "I can't see." "I can," Eli replied simply. "Wolf dogs can. We'll guide you." "To where?" Catherine demanded. "There's nowhere to go in this storm." "My cabin," Eli said. 2 valleys north, hidden, defensible, stocked for winter. The reality of her situation hit Catherine with brutal clarity. Stay and face raiders who would show no mercy, or venture into a killing blizzard with a near stranger and his wolf dogs. Neither option offered certain survival. Shadow nudged Catherine's hand insistently, as if urging her to action. The wolf dog's presence was oddly reassuring, a warm, solid certainty amid cascading uncertainties. "How far?" Catherine asked, her decision crystallizing even as she spoke. "Day's journey in good weather," Eli admitted. "Longer in storm. But raiders won't follow our trail. Snow will cover it." Catherine moved toward her bed, feeling for the cedar chest where she kept her most essential possessions. Her fingers found the small leather pouch containing her mother's locket, a packet of rare seeds Margaret had given her, and a folding knife that had belonged to her father. "I need my medicines," she said with sudden resolution. "Some are irreplaceable." "Quickly," Eli urged, his voice tight with urgency. "Choose only what's essential." Catherine moved with practiced efficiency, born of necessity. Since losing her sight, she had learned to organize her belongings meticulously. Her fingers found the small wooden chest containing her most precious medicinal herbs and tinctures, each in containers with distinct tactile markers. "These," she insisted, holding the chest, "and my winter clothes." Eli made a sound of affirmation, then placed something heavy and fur-lined into her arms. "My coat. Warmer than yours." Catherine hesitated only briefly before accepting the offering. The coat carried his scent, pine, smoke, and something indefinably wild, and felt substantially heavier than her own woolen garment. "The raiders?" she asked, pulling on the oversized coat. "How close?" "Minutes away," Eli answered, continuing his efficient preparations. "Moving slow through snow, but coming straight here." The wolf dog's agitation confirmed his assessment. Their growls had deepened, rumbling continuously like distant thunder. Catherine's mind raced through the implications of their hasty departure. "My cabin, everything I've built here with Robert. They'll take it all." "Shelter or possessions," Eli stated flatly. "Can't save both." The brutal pragmatism of frontier. "Survival." Catherine nodded grimly, accepting the truth of his words, even as her heart ached at abandoning the home she and Robert had created together. "How will we travel?" she asked, focusing on immediate concerns. "I can't see to navigate in a blizzard." "Rope," Eli explained, and she heard him tearing fabric. "Bed sheets," she realized. "Tie between us. You follow. Shadow guides your right side, always within reach." As if understanding her role, Shadow pressed against Catherine's leg reassuringly. The wolf dog's solid presence had already become a comfort Catherine hadn't known she needed. Eli worked quickly, fashioning a makeshift harness that connected them. Catherine felt the sheet being tied securely around her waist, then heard Eli fastening the other end to himself. He placed her left hand on the fabric strip between them. "Keep hold," he instructed. "Pull tight if you need to stop. 2 tugs if you're falling." Catherine nodded, mentally preparing herself for what would undoubtedly be the most harrowing journey of her life. "What about my walking stick? I use it to—" "No stick," Eli interrupted. "Need both hands free sometimes for climbing, steadying." He pressed something into her right hand. "Take knife instead, for protection, or if rope catches on something." The weight of the hunting knife was familiar. It was Robert's, the same. One she had threatened Eli with when he first entered her cabin. The irony wasn't lost on her. "Ready?" Eli asked, his tone suggesting no answer, but affirmative would be accepted. Yes, Catherine lied, her heart hammering against her ribs. The next moments passed in a blur of sensation and noise. The cabin door opened, unleashing the full fury of the blizzard. Wind-carrying ice crystals stung Catherine's exposed cheeks. The temperature drop was immediate and shocking, stealing her breath. Timber barked once, a commanding sound, and Catherine felt the fabric between her and Eli pull taut. "Step high," Eli called over the wind's howl. "Snow's deep." Catherine followed his instruction, lifting her feet exaggeratedly with each step. The snow reached midway up her calves, its cold immediately penetrating her leather boots. Shadow pressed. Against her right side, a living guide rail, keeping her on course when disorientation threatened to overwhelm her. They had made it perhaps 20 yards from the cabin when a shout carried faintly through the storm. The raiders had arrived. "Faster," Eli urged, the line between them pulling more insistently. Catherine struggled to comply, her boots now heavy with clinging snow. Every instinct screamed against this madness, venturing blindly into a blizzard. With temperatures well below freezing, guided only by a man she barely knew and his semi-wild companions. Yet the alternative, facing armed raiders alone in her cabin, was unquestionably worse. The ground began to slope upward, each step becoming a battle against gravity as well as snow. Catherine's breath came in painful gasps, the frigid air burning. Her lungs, sweat formed beneath her layers despite the cold, a dangerous development she knew could lead to hypothermia once it cooled. "Eli," she called, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "I need to rest." The line slackened immediately. Eli appeared beside her, his gloved hand finding her shoulder. "Just ahead," he said close to her ear. "Ridge first, then easier." Catherine nodded, gathering her remaining strength. She could do this. She must. The climb to the ridge seemed endless, each step more difficult than the last. Twice Catherine stumbled, and twice Shadow was there, bracing against her to prevent a fall. The wolf dog's uncanny awareness of her needs transcended training. It was as if the animal genuinely understood her vulnerability. When they finally crested the ridge, the wind's force doubled, threatening to knock Catherine off her feet. Eli's arm went around her waist, steadying her. "Downhill now," he shouted above the gale. "Forest ahead. Better shelter." The descent proved equally treacherous, but demanded less stamina. Catherine found herself sliding more than walking, the deep snow actually providing some cushion against falls. Shadow remained vigilant at her side, occasionally nudging her away from unseen obstacles. True to Eli's word, the wind's intensity decreased markedly as they entered a stand of pines. The change was immediate and welcome, still brutally cold, but without the cutting edge of exposed ridgeline. "Rest," Eli announced, guiding Catherine to sit on what felt like a fallen log, now buried under snow. Catherine sank down gratefully, her legs trembling with exertion. "The raiders, will they follow?" "No tracks to follow," Eli assured her. "Storm covers them, and they have shelter now, your cabin." The thought of strangers occupying her home, using her possessions, sleeping in her bed, sent a wave of violated anger through Catherine. She had already lost so much, her sight, her husband, and now her home. As if sensing her distress, Shadow placed her head in Catherine's lap, a gesture so unexpectedly gentle that it brought tears to Catherine's eyes. She stroked the wolf dog's thick fur, drawing comfort from the simple connection. "Strange," Eli commented, settling beside her on the log. "Shadow doesn't take to people easily, especially women." "Why especially women?" Catherine asked, grateful. For any distraction from their dire situation, Eli was silent for a moment. Found her caught in trap. Set by woman settler, husband wanted wolf pelt for wife's coat. Catherine's hand stilled in Shadow's fur. "That's horrible." Shadow remembers, Eli said simply. "Scent of women reminds her, makes her cautious." Until you. I'm hardly a threat, Catherine observed wryly. I can't even see to set a trap. She knows, Eli replied. Senses things, like I said. Your pain, your strength too. Before Catherine could respond, Timber emitted a low, warning growl from somewhere ahead of them. Eli tensed beside her. What is it? Catherine whispered. Not sure, Eli murmured. Something moving through trees ahead. He stood slowly, his rifle, making a soft, metallic sound as he readied it. Stay here with Shadow. Ghost, with me. Catherine heard the soft crunch of Eli's footsteps moving away, accompanied by what she presumed was Ghost. Shadow remained at her side, now alert and watchful. Rather than seeking affection, minutes passed with excruciating slowness. The blizzard's howl seemed distant within the forest's protection, allowing Catherine to hear other sounds more clearly. The creak of snow-laden branches, the occasional fall of accumulated snow, Shadow's steady breathing beside her. Then came a sound that froze her blood, a man's voice carried faintly through the trees. Tracks here, fresh ones, another voice answered, too distant for Catherine to discern the words. Shadow's growl vibrated against Catherine's leg, deep and threatening. The wolf dog shifted position, placing herself between Catherine and the direction of the voices. Catherine's mind raced. Had the raiders followed them after all? Or were these different men, perhaps trappers caught in the same storm? Either way, her blindness made her terrifyingly vulnerable without Eli's guidance. A gunshot cracked through the forest, startlingly close. Shadow's growl escalated to a snarl. Catherine clutched Robert's knife, her knuckles white around the handle. Footsteps approached rapidly, multiple sets, she realized with mounting dread. Shadow moved forward, her body coiled with tension. Well now, what have we here? A male voice drawled, much closer than Catherine had anticipated. A woman alone in a blizzard? This must be our lucky day. Catherine froze at the unfamiliar voice, her grip tightening on Robert's knife. Shadow's snarling intensified, the wolf dog's body vibrating with barely contained aggression. Call off your mutt, lady, the man continued, or my friend here will put a bullet in it. Shadow, Catherine said evenly, though her heart hammered in her chest. Come back. To her surprise, Shadow obeyed, retreating until her fur pressed against Catherine's legs, though her growling never ceased. Smart decision, the man approved. Now, what's a pretty thing like you doing out in this storm, and where's your companion? We saw 2 sets of tracks. Catherine's mind raced. These men had followed their trail, which meant they were almost certainly the raiders who had targeted her cabin, and if they were asking about Eli, it meant they hadn't encountered him yet, or at least, not all of them had. I'm alone, she lied, hoping to draw attention away from wherever Eli might be. My guide abandoned me when the storm worsened. A second man laughed, the sound devoid of warmth. That's so. Then who fired that shot we heard? Hunters, perhaps, Catherine suggested, fighting to keep her voice steady. Or trappers. In this blizzard? Not likely, the first man countered, his footsteps crunched closer in the snow. What's wrong with your eyes, girl? Why aren't you looking at me when I'm talking to you? Catherine lifted her chin defiantly. I'm blind, have been for 3 years. A low whistle. Blind, you say? Now ain't that interesting? The man's voice shifted as he apparently turned to address his companion. What do you think, Jasper? Worth taking with us? Dunno, Silas, the second man. Jasper replied doubtfully. Blind woman's extra trouble. Can't work, can't cook proper. Got other uses, Silas remarked crudely, sending a chill through Catherine. That had nothing to do with the cold. Shadow sensed Catherine's fear and responded with a menacing growl that rumbled from deep in her chest. Catherine placed a restraining hand on the wolf dog's neck, knowing that if Shadow attacked, she would likely be shot. Where's Pike? Jasper asked suddenly. Should have caught up by now. Probably still tracking the other set of prints, Silas responded. Man takes his sweet time with everything. The casual revelation that there was a third raider still searching for Eli sent another surge of fear through Catherine. Had Eli and Ghost encountered this Pike? Was that the gunshot they'd heard? "Stand up, girl," Silas ordered. "Slowly now. Any sudden moves and your dog gets shot." Catherine rose carefully, keeping her hand on Shadow's neck. The knife was concealed in the folds of Eli's oversized coat, but she feared using it. In her blindness, she might miss her target entirely or worse, injure Shadow in the process. "Now then," Silas continued, close enough now that Catherine could smell tobacco and unwashed skin. "Here's how this is gonna work. You're coming with us back to that nice little cabin we found. Storm's too fierce for traveling far, and we need shelter for a few days. You'll cook, you'll clean, you'll do whatever else we tell you to do, understand? And if I refuse," Catherine countered, playing for time, "where was Eli? Had he been captured or worse?" Silas chuckled unpleasantly. "Blind or not, you ain't stupid. You know what happens if you refuse." Catherine did know. These men would either force her compliance or kill her on the spot. Neither option was acceptable. "Fine," she agreed, her mind scrambling for alternatives. "But Shadow comes too. She helps me navigate." "That wild thing," Jasper objected. "It'll tear our throats out first chance it gets." "She obeys me," Catherine insisted, an idea forming. "You saw how she retreated when I commanded." Silas seemed to consider this. "All right, bring the mutt. But one wrong move from either of you, and you're both dead. Clear?" "Clear," Catherine affirmed, her hand still tight on Shadow's fur. The wolf dog remained tense, but controlled, awaiting direction. "Jasper, fire another shot," Silas instructed. "Signal Pike to come back. No point chasing ghosts in this storm." Jasper complied, the rifle's report reverberating through the trees, and sending a flurry of snow cascading from the branches above. The forest fell eerily silent in its wake, as if all wildlife had been stunned by the intrusion. "Now move," Silas ordered, shoving Catherine roughly forward. "Back the way you came." Catherine stumbled, momentarily disoriented without the guiding rope that had connected her to Eli. Shadow pressed against her leg, steering her away from an unseen obstacle. A tree trunk, she realized, as her outstretched hand brushed rough. "But I need to know where I'm going," Catherine protested. "I can't see to follow your tracks." "Ain't that convenient," Silas muttered. After a moment's consideration, he added, "Jasper, give me that extra rope from your pack." Catherine heard rustling. Then Silas grabbed her arm. "Hands in front," he commanded. Reluctantly, Catherine extended her hands, still concealing Robert's knife within Eli's coat. Silas bound her wrists together, the rope rough against her skin. Then he tied another length to the bindings. "There," he declared, giving the rope a sharp tug. "Like leading a mule. Follow the pull." The crude arrangement was actually functional, Catherine realized. Not unlike the sheet Eli had rigged between them, though considerably less dignified. They began moving through the forest, Shadow maintaining a protective position at Catherine's side. The wolf dog's presence was more than comfort. It was strategic. Guidance, subtly nudging Catherine around obstacles that Silas made no effort to warn her about. "Where's your friend headed?" Silas asked abruptly, pulling Catherine to a stop. "The one who left you?" Catherine chose her words carefully. "North, I believe. He mentioned a trapper's cabin in the next valley." "Hear that, Jasper?" Silas called back. "Might be worth checking out once the storm breaks. Probably stocked for winter." "If Pike doesn't, get him first," Jasper replied. They resumed walking, the blizzard's fury increasing as they emerged from the denser part of the forest. Catherine estimated they'd been traveling for about 20 minutes when a third voice hailed them. "Silas! Jasper! Hold up!" The newcomer, Pike, presumably, approached from their right. His breathing labored. "Lost the damn track in the storm. Too much fresh snow." He paused, noticing Catherine. "Well now, what's this?" "Found her sitting pretty as you please with this wolf dog," Silas explained. "Says she's blind and her guide abandoned her. Taking her back to the cabin." Pike made a sound of interest. Blind, huh? That why she's got those cloudy eyes? Catherine tensed at the scrutiny, uncomfortably aware of how vulnerable she was. 3 armed men against 1 blind woman and a wolf. Dog were not favorable odds, even if Shadow were to attack. "Where's Ghost?" Pike asked suddenly, his voice sharpening. "Swear I saw tracks of 2 dogs. Catherine's pulse quickened. How did Pike know Ghost's name? "What are you talking about?" Silas demanded. "There's just the 1 dog here." "No. There were 2 sets of dog prints," Pike insisted. "And a man's. Tracks I was following belonged to Eli Walker. I'd know his sign anywhere." A chill ran through Catherine at the recognition in Pike's voice. He knew Eli by name. "Walker?" Jasper echoed. "The mountain hermit. Thought he was just a story to scare children. He's real enough," Pike assured him grimly. "Deserted from the Union Army after Antietam. Killed 3 men before disappearing west. Been hunting him 5 years for the bounty." The revelation struck Catherine like a physical blow. Eli was a wanted man, a deserter and killer. Her instinct to trust him suddenly seemed naive and dangerous. "Well, if he's real, he can't be far," Silas reasoned, "and he obviously cares enough about this woman to drag her through a blizzard. Might be useful leverage." "Dangerous game," Pike warned. "Walker's not right in the head. Lives with wolves. Talks to nearly no one. Settlers near Bitterroot call him the Ghost." "Every man bleeds," Silas dismissed casually. "Even ghosts." He gave Catherine's rope a sharp tug. "Let's get back to shelter before we freeze. We can figure out how to use her against Walker once we're warm." As they began moving again, Catherine's mind whirled with this new information. Eli had mentioned the war, had said he'd caused too much death, but she'd assumed he meant as a surgeon making triage decisions. The truth, it seemed, was far darker. Yet something about Pike's story didn't align with the man she'd encountered. The Eli who had shared her cabin, who had shown such care with his wolf dogs, who had risked himself to warn her about raiders, that man didn't strike her as a cold-blooded killer. Shadow pressed closer to Catherine, as if sensing her distress. The wolf dog's constant presence was reassuring, despite the dire circumstances. If Eli truly was the dangerous fugitive Pike claimed, why would his companions show such gentle loyalty? As they trudged through deepening snow, Catherine listened intently for any sign of Eli or Ghost in the surrounding forest. Had they escaped, or were they following, waiting for an opportunity to strike? And if so, could she trust Eli to rescue her, or had she merely exchanged one danger for another? The trek back toward Catherine's cabin felt interminable. The blizzard's intensity had increased, the wind screaming through the trees and driving snow like needles against any exposed skin. Despite Eli's heavy coat, Catherine felt the cold seeping into her bones, her fingers and toes beginning to numb dangerously. "How much farther?" she called to Silas, who yanked her forward by the rope whenever her pace slowed. "Stop whining," he snapped. "We get there when we get there." Shadow stayed pressed against Catherine's side, occasionally nudging her away from hidden hazards. The wolf dog's warmth and guidance had become her lifeline in more ways than one. "She's slowing us down too much," Pike complained from behind. "Weather's worsening. We should make camp." "In this," Jasper objected, "we'd freeze by morning." "The woman said there's a trapper's cabin nearby," Pike reminded them. "Might be closer than backtracking to her place." Catherine's heart sank. If they changed direction to search for the fictional trapper's cabin she'd invented, they'd likely all perish in the storm. Yet correcting her lie would only invite more suspicion. Silas halted abruptly, causing Catherine to bump into him. "Which direction to this trapper's cabin?" he demanded. Catherine hesitated, weighing her limited options. "I'm not certain," she admitted. "My guide mentioned it was northward, but I have no way to navigate." "Useless," Silas muttered, giving the rope another sharp tug. "We continue to her cabin. At least we know it exists." They pressed on, the group's pace slowing as the snow deepened and the temperature plummeted. Catherine strained her ears for any sound beyond their labored breathing and crunching footsteps, any indication of Eli or Ghost following them. The forest remained eerily silent except for the wind's constant howl. Without warning, Shadow suddenly froze beside Catherine, her body tensing. A low growl vibrated from the wolf dog's throat. "Shut that mutt up," Silas ordered, his voice tight with new tension. Catherine placed a hand on Shadow's neck. "What is it?" she murmured, feeling the animal's muscles coiled beneath her fingers. "I said quiet," Silas hissed, yanking Catherine's rope hard enough to make her stumble. Then Catherine heard it, a long, mournful howl rising above the storms. Din, not the wind, but a wolf calling from somewhere in the forest around them. The sound faded, only to be answered by another howl from the opposite direction. "What the hell?" Jasper whispered, his voice suddenly uncertain. "Wolves," Pike stated, flatly. "Surrounding us." "Just wild wolves," Silas dismissed. "They won't attack armed men." Pike's laugh was bitter. "Those aren't just any wolves. That's Walker's other dog, Ghost, white as snow and twice as deadly. And if she's howling patterns like that, Walker's directing her." Catherine's heart leapt with something between fear and hope. Eli hadn't abandoned her. He was out there using Ghost to communicate, perhaps to coordinate some kind of rescue, or perhaps something else entirely. "Walker trains his dogs to hunt men," Pike continued, his voice dropping. "Saw what they did to a trapper up near Helena. 2 winters ago, nothing left but bones and blood in the snow." "You're trying to spook us," Silas accused, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Wish I was," Pike replied grimly. "Walker was a surgeon before deserting. Knows exactly where to direct his wolves to tear through muscle and sinew for quickest kill." Another howl pierced the storm, this one closer. Shadow's ears pricked forward, her posture alerting Catherine that something was about to happen. 2. "Hell with this," Jasper muttered. "I didn't sign up to be wolf bait." "Shut up," Silas snapped. "Nobody's getting eaten by wolves. We keep moving." Pike's voice held new urgency. "Listen to me, Silas. Our only chance is getting to solid shelter. Forget the woman. She's slowing us down. Walker wants her back. Let him have her." "And let him pick us off one by one after?" Silas countered. "No, she's our protection. He won't risk her getting hurt in a crossfire." Catherine felt Shadow tense beside her, the wolf dog's muscles bunching in preparation for something. Without fully understanding why, Catherine dropped to her knees in the snow, pulling herself into the smallest target possible. Her instinct. It proved prescient. A heartbeat later, a rifle shot cracked through the forest, followed immediately by Jasper's startled cry and the thud of a body falling into snow. "Get down!" Pike shouted, then grunted as something heavy struck him. Catherine heard snarling, not Shadow, who remained pressed against her side, but another animal. Ghost, she realized, had attacked Pike. Chaos erupted around her, men shouting, weapons discharging, animals growling. Unable to see the fight unfolding, Catherine stayed low, working frantically at the ropes binding her wrists. A body crashed to the ground near her, spraying snow across her face. Someone seized her arm roughly. Silas, she recognized from his tobacco scent. "Call off your friend and his dogs," he demanded, pressing something cold and metallic against her temple. "A gun." "I can't," Catherine answered truthfully. "I don't control them." "Then you're no use to me," Silas snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger. Shadow launched herself with explosive force, her weight colliding with Silas and knocking him sideways. Catherine heard the gun discharge, the bullet whistling harmlessly past her ear. Then came the terrible sounds of Shadow attacking Silas, snarls, screams, and the wet, tearing noises that confirmed Pike's gruesome description of wolf-dog attacks. Disoriented and terrified, Catherine crawled away from the sounds of struggle, her bound hands hampering her movements. The blizzard's disorienting effect combined with her blindness left her with no sense of direction or safety. A hand closed around her arm, and Catherine lashed out instinctively with her bound wrists. "Catherine!" Eli's voice cut through her panic. "It's me!" Relief flooded through her, along with lingering uncertainty after Pike's revelations. "Eli, the men! They said you're wanted, that you killed—" "Later," he interrupted, cutting through her bindings with a quick slice of his knife. "Need to move, now." The urgency in his tone brooked no argument. Catherine felt Ghost brush past her legs, then heard Shadow approaching, the wolf dog's footsteps distinctive even to her heightened senses. "Shadow?" Catherine questioned anxiously. "Is she hurt?" "No," Eli assured her. "Resilient, like you." He helped her to her feet, immediately retying the guiding rope between them. "Men?" Catherine understood his terse inquiry. I think they're all dead." Eli made no response to this, merely securing the final knot in their connecting rope. "Storm's worsening, night coming, need shelter soon." "My cabin," Catherine began. "Too far now," Eli interrupted. "Cave nearby, temporary." Without further discussion, they began moving through the forest, the wolf dogs flanking them protectively. The intensity of their situation prevented conversation, each step requiring full concentration as the blizzard reached new heights of fury. Catherine's extremities had progressed from numbness to burning pain, the first warning signs of frostbite. After what seemed like hours but was likely only 40 minutes, the ground began to slope upwards sharply. Eli guided Catherine carefully around what felt like a narrow ledge, then downward into a space where the wind's howl suddenly diminished. "Cave," he explained, his voice echoing slightly. "Small but defensible." Catherine collapsed gratefully onto the stone floor, her entire body trembling with cold and exhaustion. Shadow and Ghost entered behind them, shaking off snow and bringing their warm presence to the confined space. "Need fire," Eli stated, moving around the cave with purpose. "Stay there." Catherine huddled against the cave wall, listening to Eli's efficient movements. Within minutes, she heard the welcome crackle of kindling catching flame. The small fire's heat reached her gradually, painful at first against her cold-ravaged skin, then increasingly blissful as circulation returned to her fingers and toes. "Your feet," Eli observed. "Boots off. Check for frostbite." Catherine complied, wincing as she removed her snow-soaked boots and stockings. Eli knelt before her, his hands surprisingly gentle as they examined her feet. "Minor frostbite," he diagnosed. "Recoverable. Need to warm slowly." As Eli tended to her, applying snow to her feet in a technique Catherine recognized as proper treatment for mild frostbite, she gathered her courage to address Pike's accusations. "Those men," she began carefully, "the one called Pike, he knew. You said you're wanted for desertion, for killing 3 men after Antietam." Eli's hands stilled momentarily, then resumed their methodical work. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual, heavy with something that might have been shame or regret. "Pike was mistaken," he said slowly. "Killed 1 man, not 3. Military surgeon who amputated unnecessarily, for practice, for specimens." Catherine's breath caught. "What?" "After battles," Eli continued, each word seemingly dragged from some dark internal place, "some surgeons took limbs that could be saved, called it medical necessity. Wasn't always true." He paused, shifting to wrap Catherine's feet in a dry cloth he'd apparently carried in his pack. "Found one, confronted him. Fight ensued. He died." The stark confession hung in the air between them. Catherine processed what she'd heard, measuring it against the man she'd come to know. A killer, yes. The day's events had confirmed that capacity for violence, but not perhaps the cold-blooded murderer Pike had described. "You deserted after that?" she asked. "Yes," Eli acknowledged. "Couldn't stay. Military would hang me. Surgeon was decorated officer. I was nobody." Catherine absorbed Eli's confession. the pieces of his fractured story finally aligning. A military surgeon who had witnessed the worst of Antietam's carnage confronted the horror of unnecessary amputations and took justice into his own hands, only to be forced into a life of exile. The truncated speech, the isolation, the bond with animals rather than humans, all of it made a terrible kind of sense. "You've been running ever since," she said softly. "It wasn't a question." "Yes." Eli moved away, adding fuel to their small fire. "Pike was bounty hunter, tracked me for years. And now he's dead," Catherine stated, the reality of their situation settling coldly upon her. "They're all dead." Eli didn't deny it. "Would have killed you, without hesitation." Catherine knew he was right. She had felt Silas's gun against her. Temple had heard the casual cruelty in his voice as he threatened her. Yet the violence that had unfolded around her, violence she had been spared witnessing but could all too vividly imagine, left her profoundly shaken. "What happens now?" she asked, huddling closer to the fire. "The storm—" "Wait it out," Eli replied pragmatically. "One day, maybe two, then decide. Decide what remained unspoken between them." Catherine's cabin was now likely ransacked, possibly damaged beyond simple repair. Eli's hidden dwelling lay somewhere to the north, but reaching it would mean another dangerous journey through the blizzard's aftermath. And beyond these immediate concerns loomed larger questions about justice, survival, and what sort of future a blind widow and a fugitive military deserter could possibly forge in this unforgiving wilderness. Shadow settled beside Catherine, the wolf dog's body providing welcome warmth against the cave's chill. Ghost positioned herself near the entrance, ever vigilant. These creatures, neither fully wild nor truly tame, had become Catherine's unexpected guardians. Like Eli himself, they existed in the borderlands between worlds. "Rest," Eli advised, arranging his pack to create a makeshift pillow for her. "Long journey ahead once storm passes." Exhaustion overwhelmed Catherine's capacity for further questions or concerns. She curled against Shadow's warmth, the events of the day catching up to her in a wave of bone-deep weariness. Her last conscious thought before sleep claimed her was that she had never felt both so imperiled and so strangely protected as she did in this moment. When Catherine woke, her first awareness was of the cave's changed acoustics. The constant howl of wind had diminished to an occasional moan, suggesting the blizzard's fury had finally spent itself. Her second awareness was of voices, or rather, a voice. Eli's voice, speaking in a low, continuous murmur. She lay still, listening. Gone was the truncated speech pattern she had grown accustomed to. Instead, Eli spoke in complete, articulate sentences, the educated physician still alive within the mountain hermit. "Not ideal, I know," he was saying, presumably to the wolf. "Dogs. But we don't have many options. The valley route would take too long, and the eastern pass will be blocked for weeks after this snow." Catherine found herself oddly moved by this glimpse of the man Eli had once been. She shifted slightly, alerting him to her wakefulness. "Catherine," he acknowledged, immediately reverting to his clipped speech pattern. "Storm's easing. How are feet?" She wiggled her toes experimentally. "Painful, but I can feel them. That's good, isn't it?" "Yes. No permanent damage." He approached, kneeling beside her. "Hungry?" Only then did Catherine register the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. "Starving?" Actually, something that might have been a chuckle escaped Eli. "Good sign." He pressed something into her hands, dried meat of some kind. "Eat slowly," Catherine obeyed, savoring each bite of the jerky. As she ate, her mind returned to their predicament. "My cabin," she began hesitantly. "Do you think raiders likely damaged it?" Eli confirmed bluntly. "Not habitable now." "Your cabin, then," Catherine ventured. "Is it still our destination?" Eli was silent for several moments. "If you wish," he finally said, "or settlement eastward." could escort you. Once paths clear, the choice he offered struck Catherine forcefully. Return to the settlement, to the well-intentioned but suffocating care of people who would never see past her blindness, or venture further into the wilderness with this complex, enigmatic man and his wolf dogs. "Tell me about your cabin," she requested. "What's it like?" Eli seemed surprised by the question. "Simple, built against cliff face, one room, root cellar beneath, defensible." "Is there space for me?" Catherine asked directly. "For my medicines, my work?" Again, that lengthy pause. "Yes," he replied, something almost cautious in his tone. "Built large. Never knew why. Until now, perhaps." The implication hung between them, that perhaps he had unconsciously prepared for companionship even as he fled from human society. Catherine found the notion oddly comforting. "I would need to maintain some independence," she stated carefully. "Even blind, I'm capable of contributing. My herbal medicines—" "Know this," Eli interrupted. "Watched you navigate cabin, prepare remedies. Impressive." His simple acknowledgement of her capabilities, stated without condescension or amazement, warmed Catherine more than the fire. So few people had seen beyond her disability to recognize her remaining strengths. "The settlement would offer more security," Eli continued, his tone neutral. "Community, protection." "At what cost?" Catherine countered. "Being treated as helpless, a burden to be managed? No, thank you." She straightened her shoulders. "I'd rather risk the wilderness with someone who sees me as capable." A sound from the cave entrance drew their attention. Ghost had risen to attention, ears pricked forward. "Trouble?" Catherine asked, tension immediately returning. "No," Eli reassured her. "Storm's past. Ghost senses wildlife returning." He moved toward the cave opening. "Should scout. Assess conditions." "Is it safe to leave the cave?" Catherine asked, alarmed at the prospect of being left alone after their ordeal. "Shadow stays with you," Eli explained. "I won't go far. Need to check. For remains. The remains of the men who had died in the confrontation," Catherine realized. The grim necessity of confirming their deaths and perhaps concealing the evidence sobered her. Whatever path she chose moving forward, there would be no returning to the person she had been before this blizzard. "Be careful," she urged as he prepared to depart. "Always am," Eli replied, his hand briefly touching her shoulder. The first deliberate physical contact he had initiated beyond necessity. Back soon. After he departed with Ghost, Catherine sat in contemplative silence, Shadow a reassuring presence at her side. The cave felt different without Eli, larger yet somehow less secure, despite Shadow's vigilant companionship. Her thoughts turned to Robert, to the life they had begun building together in their remote cabin. She had loved him deeply, had mourned him profoundly. Yet even in their closest moments, Robert had never fully understood her determination to overcome her blindness, had sometimes shielded her when she wished to be challenged. Eli was different. His expectations were simultaneously higher and simpler. Survive, contribute, adapt. There was no pity in his assessment of her capabilities, only pragmatic evaluation. It was refreshing, if occasionally bruising to her pride. Shadow, suddenly, lifted her head, ears shifting toward the cave entrance. A moment later, Catherine heard the soft crunch of footsteps in snow. "Just me," Eli announced as he entered. "Clear outside, no immediate threats." "The men?" Catherine asked quietly. "Handled," Eli replied, the single word conveying all she needed to know. "Need to move soon. Weather window brief." "To your cabin," Catherine confirmed, having made her decision. "Yes, if certain," Catherine nodded firmly. "I am. The settlement holds nothing for me now." Eli began gathering their limited supplies, his movements efficient and purposeful. "Journey difficult," he warned. 2 days minimum, snow deep, temperature dropping." I survived a blizzard and armed raiders, Catherine reminded him, rising to her feet. I think I can manage a difficult journey. That sound again, the almost chuckle that suggested the more expressive man beneath Eli's reserved exterior. Never doubted, he assured her, just warning. As they prepared to depart, Catherine took stock of her situation. 2 days ago, she had been a widow resigned to death in a lonely cabin. Now she stood on the threshold of an entirely different life. One filled with uncertainty and danger, yes, but also with unexpected companionship and the chance to redefine herself once more. "Ready?" Eli asked, securing the guiding rope between them. Catherine adjusted Eli's oversized coat around her shoulders and reached down to touch Shadow's reassuring presence at her side. "Ready," she confirmed. They emerged from the cave into a transformed world. Though Catherine couldn't see the landscape, she could feel the difference in the air, crisp, still, and laden with the particular silence that follows heavy snowfall. The temperature had dropped significantly, but the sun's warmth was perceptible on her face, suggesting clear skies had replaced the blizzard's fury. "Beautiful," Eli commented uncharacteristically. "Valley below white. Trees snow-covered, sun making everything shine." The brief description allowed Catherine to form a mental image, pieced together from memories of winters before her blindness. "Which way?" she asked, orienting herself by the sun's warmth. "North," Eli replied, the rope between them pulling gently. As he began walking, "Follow ridge first, then descend to valley." Shadow took up her customary position beside Catherine, while Ghost ranged ahead, breaking trail through the deep snow. The going was difficult from the first step, each footfall plunging knee-deep into powdery drifts, requiring significant effort to continue forward. "Eli," Catherine ventured after they had been traveling for perhaps an hour, "tell me more about your cabin. What's the surrounding area like?" Eli was silent for a moment, as if the request to describe his home required careful consideration. When he finally spoke, his words came more freely than usual. "Built it 4 springs ago. Found natural overhang in cliff face. Extended with timber. Faces south for sun. Stream nearby. Never freezes completely. Good hunting grounds." Catherine nodded encouragingly, sensing his unusual willingness to share. "And inside?" "Simple," he continued. "Main room with fireplace, stone chimney, sleeping platform raised off ground, storage areas, root cellar beneath, accessible through trapdoor. Cool in summer, warm in winter." "It sounds well designed," Catherine observed, carefully navigating a steeper section of their path. "Needed to be," Eli replied. "Winters here unforgiving. No room for error." They continued in companionable silence for a time, the physical demands of their journey through deep snow requiring full concentration. Catherine found her rhythm, following the gentle guidance of the rope between them and Shadow's steady presence at her side. The wolf dog occasionally pressed against her leg to steer her away from hidden obstacles or particularly treacherous footing. By midday, they had covered perhaps 3 miles, slow progress by normal standards, but impressive given the conditions. Eli called a brief halt in the shelter of a stand of pines, where the snow depth was somewhat diminished. "Rest," he instructed. "Eat." "Something." Catherine sank gratefully onto a fallen log that Eli cleared of snow for her. Her legs trembled with exertion, unused to such prolonged effort. Shadow settled at her feet, while Ghost maintained a vigilant perimeter, occasionally disappearing into the surrounding forest, only to return minutes later. "Ghost checks for threats," Eli explained, noticing Catherine's head turning to track the wolf dog's movements. "Old habit." "How did you train them to do that?" Catherine asked, accepting the strip of jerky he offered. Eli considered this. "Didn't train exactly. Observed natural behaviors, reinforced useful ones, developed understanding." He paused. "Communication, Goes both ways. They trained me too. Catherine smiled at this unexpected insight. Robert used to say something similar about the relationship between trappers and their environment, that the wilderness teaches those willing to listen. Your husband was observant, Eli acknowledged. Rare quality. They ate their sparse meal, in silence, conserving energy. Catherine found herself wondering about practical aspects of their future arrangement. At your cabin, she ventured, how will I contribute? I need to be useful, not a burden. Already considered, Eli replied. Your medicine's valuable, knowledge important. Could teach me herbal remedies. I know surgical techniques, but plants... He trailed off, gap in knowledge. The prospect brightened Catherine's spirits considerably. A fair exchange of knowledge, her herbal expertise for his surgical skills, created a balanced partnership rather than dependency. We should gather supplies from my cabin, she suggested, if it's still viable. My herb stores took years to build. Yes, Eli agreed. Once you're settled at my place, can make trip back, salvage what's useful. Their brief rest concluded, they resumed their northward journey. The terrain gradually changed, the ridge giving way to a steeper descent into the valley below. This proved more challenging for Catherine, who relied heavily on both the guiding rope and Shadow's assistance to navigate the precarious downslope without falling. Careful here, Eli warned as they reached a particularly steep section. Ice. Beneath snow, treacherous. No sooner had he spoken than Catherine's foot hit a patch of hidden ice. She slipped, careening sideways down the slope, despite her desperate attempt to regain balance. The rope between them pulled taut, but Eli, unprepared for her sudden fall, was yanked off his footing as well. They tumbled together down the incline, snow billowing around them as they rolled. Catherine's world spun in terrifying darkness, her body colliding with unseen obstacles. She came to an abrupt halt against something solid, a tree trunk, she realized dazedly. Catherine! Eli's voice called from nearby, urgency replacing his usual reserve. Are you hurt? She took mental inventory of her body, moving limbs experimentally. I don't think anything's broken, she assured him, though pain radiated from several points of impact. Just bruised. You? Fine, he dismissed, already at her side. His hands moved over her with professional efficiency, checking for injuries. His eyes might detect that her own assessment had missed. Hit your head, he noted with concern, fingers gently probing her scalp. Catherine winced as he found a tender spot near her temple. It's not serious, she insisted, though dizziness suggested otherwise. Pupils uneven, Eli disagreed. Concussion possible. His voice held the authoritative tone of the physician he had once been. Need shelter soon, before dark. Shadow and Ghost arrived beside them, whining anxiously. Catherine reached out, finding Shadow's fur and gripping it for reassurance. How far to your cabin now? Too far today, Eli admitted reluctantly. Especially injured. Need closer shelter. Catherine's heart sank. Another night exposed to the elements might prove dangerous, especially with a head injury. The cave, too far back, Eli vetoed. Need to continue forward. He was silent a moment, considering. Remember abandoned trapper's cabin? One you mentioned. To raiders. That was a lie, Catherine confessed. I made it up to mislead them. Strange coincidence, Eli replied, a hint of amusement in his tone. Actually, is old trapper's cabin 2 miles ahead. Used it myself occasionally. Basic shelter. Relief washed through Catherine. Can we reach it before nightfall? Yes, if careful. Eli helped her to her feet, steadying her when dizziness made her sway. Lean on me. Shadow other side. With Eli's arm around her waist and Shadow pressed supportively against her right leg, Catherine began moving forward again. The fall had shaken her confidence, amplifying her awareness of vulnerability. Even with Eli's guidance, her blindness made such terrain treacherous, potentially deadly. They proceeded at a much slower pace, each step measured and cautious. Catherine's head throbbed increasingly, and nausea, a worrying sign of concussion, began to churn her stomach. She said nothing, understanding that reaching shelter was their only viable option. The short winter day was waning when Eli finally announced, "Cabin ahead, Ghost already checking inside." "Thank goodness," Catherine murmured, exhaustion evident in her voice. The combination of physical exertion, injury and cold had drained her last reserves of strength. They approached what Eli described as a small, crude structure, a single room built of rough-hewn logs with a partially collapsed roof at one end. "Not pretty," he acknowledged, "but solid enough. We'll keep worst weather out." Ghost emerged from the doorway, apparently satisfied that the cabin was unoccupied and safe. Eli guided Catherine carefully over the threshold and into the musty interior. The temperature inside was only marginally warmer than outside, but the blessed absence of wind made it feel like a sanctuary. "Sit," Eli directed, leading her to what felt like a crude bench against one wall. "Need fire first, then examine head properly." Catherine sank onto the bench gratefully, her entire body aching from the day's journey and their tumble down the slope. Shadow settled beside her, the wolf dog's warmth a comfort against the cabin's penetrating chill. Eli moved efficiently around the small space, gathering what materials remained for a fire. Soon, the welcome crackle of flames brought both light and heat to their temporary shelter. Catherine turned her face toward the warmth, allowing it to thaw her cold-numbed features. "Better?" Eli asked, returning to kneel before her. "Much," Catherine affirmed, "though my head is pounding quite fiercely now." "Expected?" he replied, his fingers gently probing her temple again. "Definite concussion. Need rest. Limited movement. Monitoring." The clinical assessment was delivered with professional detachment, but Catherine sensed underlying concern. "Is it serious?" she asked, trying to keep apprehension from her voice. "Moderate," Eli diagnosed. "Not life-threatening if properly treated." He pressed a water skin into her hands. "Drink. Slowly. Prevent dehydration." As Catherine sipped the cold water, she felt Eli moving around the cabin, apparently assessing their accommodations more thoroughly. "Roof damaged, but not over sleeping area," he reported. "Found old pallet. Usable." "How long will we need to stay here?" Catherine asked, her thoughts already turning to practical matters. "Minimum 2 days," Eli replied without hesitation. "Head injury requires caution. Moving too soon dangerous." The prospect of further delay might once have frustrated Catherine. Now she accepted it with equanimity. The journey had already proven more challenging than anticipated, and rushing forward with a concussion would be foolish. 2 days then, she agreed, setting aside the water skin. "You'll be impatient too. Reach your home." "Home can wait," Eli stated simply. His hand briefly touched her shoulder, that same tentative gesture of connection he had shown in the cave. "Your safety more important." The statement, delivered in his characteristic clipped manner, nevertheless carried emotional weight that Catherine hadn't expected. This man, who had fled human connection for 7 years, was prioritizing her well-being over his evident desire to return to his isolated sanctuary. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. Finding me. Saving me. I would have died in that blizzard without you." Eli was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an unusual depth of emotion. "Perhaps saved each other." The 2 days of rest in the trapper's cabin stretched into 3 as Catherine's concussion symptoms proved more persistent than initially hoped. Eli maintained a constant vigil, checking her pupils regularly, ensuring she drank enough water, and preparing simple broths from provisions in his pack, supplemented by whatever Ghost managed to hunt in the surrounding forest. On the morning of the 4th day, Catherine woke to find her headache had finally subsided to a dull, manageable ache rather than the piercing pain that had plagued her. She sat up carefully on the pallet where she'd spent most of the past days, testing her balance. "Better today," Eli observed from across the small cabin, his keen medical eye missing nothing. "Much," Catherine agreed, relief evident in her voice. "I think we can continue our journey." Eli approached, kneeling before her to examine her eyes once more. "Pupils equal now," he confirmed. "Good sign." His fingers gently probed the tender area at her temple. Swelling reduced, too. "Your medical training has served us well," Catherine remarked, "even out here, far from hospitals and proper supplies." "Medicine adapts," Eli replied simply. "True healing doesn't require fancy buildings." Catherine smiled at this philosophy, so aligned with her own approach to herbal remedies. "When can we leave?" "After eating," Eli decided. "Need strength. Journey still difficult." While they shared a breakfast of jerky and the last of Eli's dried berries, Catherine considered how their relationship had evolved during these days of enforced proximity. Eli's speech, though still economical, had grown less truncated. He had shared stories of his army days, of medical techniques learned and refined on battlefields, of his journey westward after deserting. In turn, Catherine had spoken of her life before blindness, her apprenticeship with the elderly herbalist Margaret, her courtship with Robert. These exchanges, though sometimes halting, had woven connections between them that transcended their unusual circumstances. Catherine now understood that Eli's retreat from human society hadn't stemmed solely from fear of capture, but from profound disillusionment with humanity's capacity for cruelty. And Eli had come to appreciate Catherine's fierce independence, not as mere stubbornness, but as essential to her sense of self after blindness had stripped away so much else. "Ready?" Eli asked as they finished their meal. Catherine nodded, rising steadily to her feet. "How far to your cabin now?" "Half-day's journey," Eli estimated. "Terrain easier from here, valley floor mostly." They departed within the hour, leaving the trapper's cabin tidied, and with a small stack of firewood for the next traveler who might need emergency shelter. The day dawned clear and cold, the sun's brilliance on snow, perceptible even to Catherine as warmth on her face. Shadow resumed her position at Catherine's side, while Ghost ranged ahead, vigilant as ever. As Eli had predicted, the journey proved less challenging than their previous day of travel. The valley floor offered more consistent footing, and paths, used by wildlife, created natural routes through the deep snow. They made good progress, stopping only briefly at midday to rest and share water. "Almost there," Eli announced late in the afternoon. "Smell smoke?" Catherine lifted her face, inhaling deeply. A faint scent of wood smoke drifted on the breeze. Barely. Perceptible, but definitely present. "Yes," she confirmed. "Is someone at your cabin?" "No," Eli assured her. "Embers banked before leaving. Still alive." The revelation startled Catherine. "You've been gone over a week. How could the fire still be burning?" "Stone fireplace," Eli explained. "Holds heat. Designed special way. Banked properly. Can last 2 weeks." This level of foresight and preparation impressed Catherine, reinforcing her confidence in Eli's capability to thrive in this harsh environment. She found herself increasingly curious to discover the home he had created in this remote wilderness. They climbed a gentle slope. Shadow, guiding Catherine around obstacles with practiced ease. The scent of smoke grew stronger, accompanied by the subtle change in acoustics that indicated they were approaching a structure sheltered by trees. "Here," Eli announced simply, halting their progress. "Home." Catherine stood still, absorbing the sounds and smells of the place that might become her new home. The whisper of wind through pine needles, the distant gurgle of a stream not yet completely frozen, the rich, complex scent of wood smoke mingled with pine resin and something else. Herbs, she realized. Eli had been drying herbs in his cabin. May. "Aye?" she asked, reaching out her hands. Eli understood immediately. He guided her forward until her fingers contacted rough-hewn logs, warm from the afternoon sun, despite the winter cold. She explored the exterior wall, noting the careful craftsmanship, the tight fitting of logs sealed with what felt like a mixture of clay and moss. This was no crude shelter, but a thoughtfully constructed dwelling, built to last. "Come inside," Eli invited, leading her to the doorway. Catherine stepped over the threshold and was immediately embraced by warmth. After days of bitter cold, the sensation was almost overwhelming. She stood still, allowing her remaining senses to catalogue her surroundings. The cabin smelled of wood, smoke, dried herbs, and leather. Its acoustics suggested a single large room, with a high ceiling. Heat radiated from what must be the substantial fireplace Eli had mentioned. "Chair here." Eli guided her to a seat, not a crude bench like those in the trapper's cabin, but a proper chair with a high back and arms, surprisingly comfortable. "You made this?" Catherine asked, running her hands over the smooth wood. "Yes," Eli confirmed. "Long winters, plenty of time for woodworking." As Shadow and Ghost settled contentedly near the rekindled fire, Eli moved around the cabin, describing its features to help Catherine orient herself. The raised sleeping platform along the back wall, the workspace with tools hanging in precise arrangements, the shelves of supplies carefully organized, the trapdoor to the root cellar, the medicine chest containing his surgical instruments and limited pharmaceutical supplies. "And here," he concluded, leading her to a corner near a window, "space I never used, southern exposure, good light, would suit your herb work." Catherine explored the area with her hands, finding empty shelves and a solid table at comfortable working height. It was, indeed, perfect for her purposes, as if designed with her needs in mind, though they had met only days ago. "It's remarkable," she said sincerely. "All of it. You've created something truly extraordinary here." Eli made a sound that might have been embarrassment. "Necessary," he deflected. "For survival." "No," Catherine disagreed gently. "This goes beyond necessity. This is—" She searched for the right word. "A home. A real home." The silence that followed carried emotional weight. When Eli finally spoke, his voice had softened. "Can be your home too, if you wish." The offer, though expected after their previous discussions, still moved Catherine deeply. She thought of her own cabin, now lost to her, of the settlement with its well-meaning but suffocating pity, of the life she had imagined for herself after Robert's death, a life she had nearly abandoned before Eli and his wolf dogs appeared through the blizzard. "I would like that," she answered simply. That evening, as they shared a proper meal cooked, in Eli's well-provisioned kitchen, Catherine felt a sense of rightness settle over her. Outside, the temperature dropped sharply as night descended, but inside, warmth and security enveloped them. Shadow and Ghost dozed contentedly by the fire, occasional twitches suggesting dreams of the hunt. "Eli," Catherine ventured after they had eaten, "when did you first realize you might not always be alone out here?" The question clearly surprised him. He was quiet so long that Catherine wondered if he would answer at all. "Built cabin too big," he finally said. "Never needed space, made it anyway." He paused, considering. Maybe always knew, somewhere deep, that isolation temporary. "And now?" Catherine pressed gently. Another lengthy silence. "Now," Eli replied, his voice lower, less guarded than she had ever heard it. "Now think perhaps found purpose again, beyond survival." "What purpose?" Catherine asked, though she suspected she knew. "Connection," Eli answered simply. "Healing, using skills again for good reason, teaching what I know, learning what you know." He cleared his throat. "Not alone, better." Catherine reached across the table, her hand finding his with unerring accuracy despite her blindness. "Yes, she agreed softly. Better. Outside, snow began falling again. Not the violent blizzard that had nearly claimed Catherine's life, but gentle flakes drifting down in the still night air. Within the cabin's solid walls, a new possibility was taking shape. Two damaged souls, each incomplete in their own way, finding unexpected wholeness together. The future held no certainties. Spring would eventually come, bringing decisions about venturing to settlements for supplies, about whether to risk Eli's exposure to bounty hunters like Pike, about how to balance safety with necessary human contact. But those concerns belonged to tomorrow. Tonight, in this place carved from wilderness through skill and determination, Catherine Blackwell and Eli Walker had found something neither had expected. Not just shelter from a storm, but a chance at healing deeper wounds than those visible to the eye. "We'll retrieve your medicines from your cabin when weather permits," Eli promised, his hand turning to clasp hers. "Start fresh." "Yes," Catherine agreed, a smile spreading across her face. "A fresh start. For both of us." From her place by the fire, Shadow lifted her head, dark eyes reflecting the dancing flames, as she watched over these two humans who had somehow found each other against impossible odds. Outside, winter ruled the mountains with icy authority, but within these walls, something warm and tentative had taken root, something that might, with care and patience, grow strong enough to withstand whatever storms the future might bring. Up. Next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.